One strike and a $300 million stronghold vanished before its commanders even finished their toast. That night, the Crimean sky lit up as if the horizon itself had torn apart. Hangars collapsed, helicopters were reduced to skeletons of steel, and a radar hub meant to guard the entire southern front vanished in a storm of fire. What was once a fortress designed to project strength became a crater of silence, its defenses crippled before dawn. This was not chance. It was a calculated operation, timed down to the second, that turned a routine flight into the breadcrumb trail leading to devastation. And the consequences stretched far beyond one base. They carved open blind sectors, delayed supplies, and forced entire chains of command to rethink their future. So let me ask you, if this is what 7 minutes can do, what happens when the next strike lasts longer? Stay with me, because this story will shock you. The night fractured in an instant. At exactly 3:10 a.m., the Crimean ramp lit up as if a second sun had erupted from the ground. A single strike unleashed a fireball towering nearly 120 meters, hotter than 2,000 degrees Celsius at the core. In seconds, the ramp became a furnace. Shockwaves tore outward, cracking reinforced windows up to 1.4 kilometers away. Sensors later measured an overpressure above 55 pounds per square inches at the blast center, more than enough to topple hardened shelters. 5 follow-on detonations cascaded across the airfield. Each was a chain reaction. Aviation fuel tanks bursting, refueling trucks hurled from their bays, maintenance sheds collapsing under the blast. By the third detonation, flames had spread across an area larger than 5 football fields. Commercial satellites orbiting 500 kilometers above registered the thermal bloom as a white scar stretching over 450 meters in diameter. From villages 18 kilometers away, residents reported their roofs rattling as though an earthquake had struck. On the ground, the destruction was staggering. 3 transport helicopters worth nearly $20 million each were consumed where they stood. 2 hangars collapsed into smoldering skeletons. More than 30,000 gallons of aviation fuel went up in seconds, feeding a blaze so intense it painted the night sky orange across the peninsula. Ammunition caches stacked for redeployment began to cook off in violent bursts, sending sparks and fragments hundreds of meters into the air. In under 3 minutes, what had been a quiet base turned into a storm visible from orbit. The damage tally climbed fast. Aircraft erased, radar systems crippled, storage depots burning. Early battlefield assessments put the figure well above $250 million. And yet, the true cost was not measured in money, but in the sudden void, a critical node silenced in a single stroke. As the firestorm raged, analysts in Zaporizhzhia rewound the clock to the moment just before impact. On their screens, the sequence had begun with something deceptively simple. 2 transport helicopters, worth nearly $22 million each, cooling on the west ramp. Their engines still glowed bright on infrared feeds. Behind them stretched rows of fuel drums, nearly 40,000 gallons stacked in steel barrels, and pallets of artillery shells waiting for redeployment. For Ukraine's intelligence teams, it was never about the helicopters alone. It was the cluster, the sugar cube that drew the ants. A node holding not only machines, but momentum. In those hangars sat an additional 3 maritime patrol aircraft, each with a $35 million price tag. And beyond them, a towering early warning radar, its 50-foot array sweeping across the peninsula, designed to track hundreds of airborne contacts at once. Neutralize that, and a 90-kilometer blind sector would open across western Crimea. Think about it. One strike here didn't just cripple hardware, it severed arteries. Supply lines meant to feed entire brigades, command links that controlled air defense grids, and all of it exposed, vulnerable in the middle of a routine night cycle. So let me ask you, if you were watching that radar pulse across your screen, knowing a single decision could unravel an enemy's southern logistics, would you wait, or would you take the shot? Because at 3:20 a.m., the next phase was already in motion. The air hummed with purpose. From a dark fringe 28 miles seaward, a small constellation of unmanned aircraft folded into the night, 7 in all, a compact wing of metal and intent that would decide the fate of a base. They moved like a single organism, measured, relentless, and invisible to the casual eye. Ground controllers watched telemetry blips compress into a line, command screens ticked down seconds as rehearsed sequences cascaded through secure channels. 3 of the 7 bore the weight of the mission, the strike elements, while the rest played a quieter role, forcing eyes and guns to look the wrong way. The formation cut the distance in under 7 minutes, closing at an average pace that allowed no second chances. Nervous operators tracked heat signatures, fuel drums, and clustered maintenance crews. An entire logistics node suddenly had a clock over it. By 3:24, the perimeter's alert lights were flashing, but the alarms came late, and the response was a scramble, expensive systems flaring, guns burning through limited rounds, only to find themselves chasing echoes. This was a choreography of chance and timing. A single misread, a single second too slow, and the opportunity would vanish. The 7 aircraft threaded through the dark without a word on open channels. They were not loud, but their arrival was devastatingly precise. As they closed to the final miles, a hush fell across the command cabin, the kind of hush that is louder than any shout. At 3:27, engines, feeds, and fate aligned. The strike corridor was set. The strike arrived like a blade through glass. At precisely 3:35 a.m., 3 attack drones breached the inner perimeter in perfect formation. Their approach was silent, hugging the terrain at less than 120 meters, skimming past radar arcs recalibrating after the decoy strike. For a brief instant, the airfield seemed calm again, until the first impact detonated against the maintenance ramp. The explosion lit the base, as if dawn had come early. A helicopter on standby, valued at over $18 million, was engulfed instantly. Its rotor blades, each weighing more than 200 kilograms, were hurled hundreds of meters across the tarmac, smashing into storage sheds. A refueling truck parked nearby ignited, feeding a fireball that climbed above 110 meters. Sensors recorded thermal spikes equivalent to 1,200 degrees Celsius spreading over a 500-meter radius. 7 seconds later, the second drone struck. Its target was the early warning array, a 48-foot structure designed to watch the skies over western Crimea. The detonation snapped the tower in half, silencing coverage over an area more than 85 kilometers wide. Operators inside the command post watched their screens go dark as the antenna collapsed in a shower of sparks. The third drone drove into the maritime patrol cluster at the east apron. 2 aircraft worth nearly $30 million each were torn open, secondary explosions rippling into fuel bunkers behind them. In less than 1 minute, the airfield lost airlift, surveillance, and fuel supply capacity. By the time emergency crews reached the ramp, the entire western sector was already an inferno, and the night sky was a canvas of fire. The fire spread with terrifying speed. Within 60 seconds of the first blast, 5 distinct ignition points merged into a rolling inferno that consumed nearly 12 acres of the base. Secondary explosions rippled outward not 1 or 2, but more than a dozen, as fuel trucks, ammunition crates, and auxiliary generators failed in sequence. Each detonation added a fresh plume of smoke, the black column rising above 1,500 feet, visible to satellites orbiting hundreds of kilometers overhead. 3 transport helicopters, each valued at $20 million, were reduced to charred skeletons. 2 maritime patrol aircraft together worth over $70 million, collapsed into burning fragments. The radar hub, once capable of tracking 200 aerial contacts simultaneously, lay silent, its array twisted and glowing like molten wire. In total, more than 45,000 gallons of aviation fuel had ignited, releasing an energy surge rivaling a small industrial blast. Shockwaves shattered glass facades in administrative blocks 1.2 kilometers away. Maintenance vehicles were flipped onto their sides, a warehouse roof caved in under the pressure. Analysts estimated direct material losses exceeding $280 million in less than 10 minutes, but the numbers told only part of the story. What the base truly lost was its rhythm, the coordination of airlifts, the surveillance net that shielded supply routes, the confidence that a midnight cycle could proceed unchallenged. By 3:45 a.m., the ramp was unrecognizable. A node designed to project power had itself become powerless, burning against the dark horizon. Silence fell heavier than the flames. Inside command posts across Crimea, operators scrambled to piece together fragments of data. Radios spat broken codes, but coordination collapsed. At 3:47 a.m., the last coherent transmission was logged. Radar down. Aircraft lost. Requesting immediate support. Then static. On the ground, military police sealed a 5-kilometer perimeter within minutes, but the fire's reach could not be contained. By 4:10, thermal imagery showed a hotspot spanning nearly 500 meters in diameter. Temperatures peaked above 1,300 degrees Celsius, enough to warp steel beams and melt storage racks. Explosions continued intermittently, 7 in the first half hour, each one shaking the soil like a localized tremor. In nearby towns, more than 200 civilian reports flooded emergency lines. Windows shattered across 1,800 homes, and tremors were felt up to 20 kilometers away. At 4:45 a.m., commercial satellites registered a plume stretching 15 kilometers downwind, a black scar curling over the peninsula. Analysts estimated total equipment and infrastructure damage exceeding $300 million, though the true cost lay in what had disappeared: helicopter lift, radar coverage, and 40% of the base's logistical reserves. By dawn, the official narrative was already forming. State channels called it a technical fire. Yet open-source investigators overlaid before and after imagery, revealing the obliterated ramp and collapsed hangars. The contrast was undeniable. Between 3:45 and 7, a fortress designed to shield the south had been reduced to ash, and the silence that followed spoke louder than any admission. By sunrise, the scale of the loss was undeniable. Satellite passes at 7:15 a.m. revealed an airfield transformed into a cratered grid of scorched concrete. More than 60% of its operational area was unusable, with hangars collapsed and fuel depots reduced to molten outlines. The radar hub, once a critical early warning node for southern Crimea, no longer transmitted. Its absence opened a blind sector nearly 95 kilometers wide, stretching across the western approach to the peninsula. For Russia's logistics chain, the effect was immediate. Helicopter redeployments into Kherson were halted, forcing cargo flights to reroute 150-200 kilometers farther east. What once took 2 hours now demanded nearly 3.5, with every additional mile increasing exposure to surveillance and interception. Analysts projected resupply efficiency through this axis had been cut by almost 40%. The blow extended beyond transport. With the loss of 2 maritime patrol aircraft and 1 command vehicle, coastal surveillance dropped sharply, leaving fuel convoys moving along Black Sea routes less protected. Estimates suggested at least 25,000 artillery shells and 50,000 liters of aviation fuel had been neutralized or destroyed. By the second night, the once busy runway remained dark, emergency crews still drowning hotspots. Strategic losses were already cascading into tactical ones: disrupted timetables, exposed supply nodes, and mounting pressure on alternative bases now forced to absorb the load. The fortress of steel had become a fracture in the chain. In the 2 days that followed, the strike's aftershocks spread beyond the flames. With the Crimean base silenced, Russian planners were forced into costly improvisation. Cargo flights once routed through the destroyed ramp now detoured more than 180 kilometers east to secondary hubs, adding nearly 90 minutes to each mission. Fuel convoys stretched thin along exposed roads, tripling the risk of interception. Analysts estimated that in just 48 hours, over 1,200 tons of supplies had been delayed, a backlog equal to nearly a week's combat demand at the front. The air defense grid faltered as well. With the early warning array gone, radar coverage over western Crimea collapsed into a 90-kilometer gap. Into that blind corridor, Ukrainian reconnaissance units pushed deeper, charting positions that had once been shielded. Signals showed at least 3 additional air defense batteries forced to redeploy, leaving their original sectors unguarded. By the 72-hour mark, the disruption was visible from orbit. Satellite imagery captured makeshift fuel bladders set up in open fields, and patrol aircraft dispersed to rural airstrips never intended for heavy operations. Each move created fresh vulnerabilities. What had begun as a 7-minute strike had now matured into a strategic tremor, one that bent timetables, widened exposure, and carved uncertainty into every future flight plan across the southern front. Within 3 days, the political dimension of the strike overshadowed the smoldering ruins. Moscow's official statements remained cautious, insisting the event was a localized fire. Yet independent analysts circulated satellite mosaics showing a blackened ramp nearly 1,000 meters long, collapsed hangars, and fuel depots erased from view. The contrast between silence and evidence deepened public speculation. By the 4th day, at least 4 major international outlets carried images confirming the damage. Western defense officials estimated losses exceeding $320 million, while open-source groups tallied 3 destroyed helicopters, 2 maritime patrol aircraft, and 1 radar hub. Telegram channels inside Crimea lit up with shaky clips, night skies glowing red, fragments raining onto rooftops, and military police cordoning streets within 20 kilometers of the base. Diplomatic ripples soon followed. NATO officials described the strike as a strategic disruption, while regional governments warned of escalation. Russian command, meanwhile, shifted additional Podlet K-1 radars and short-range defenses into Crimea, a redeployment that strained coverage elsewhere. By the end of the first week, the story had left no corner untouched. Part battlefield, part propaganda war, and part diplomatic crisis. A fortress meant to project strength had become a symbol of sudden vulnerability. A week after the firestorm, the Crimean base was still a scar on the map. Satellite images showed a skeleton of blackened concrete, hangars flattened, and smoke traces curling long after flames had died. Yet the material wreckage was only part of the story. What remained were the unanswered questions, the fractures that no infrared feed could measure. Who had coordinated the strike so precisely that 7 minutes unraveled years of fortification? Was it simply a calculated Ukrainian gamble, or the visible tip of a wider intelligence effort involving partners and unseen networks? And beyond the battlefield, what did this signal for the months ahead? Each destroyed aircraft and collapsed radar told of immediate loss, but the greater weight lay in the strategic vacuum left behind. For Russia, the cost was not just $320 million in shattered assets, but the forced recalibration of southern logistics. For Ukraine, it was proof that timing and precision could bend the balance of power. And for the region, it was a reminder that one silent night could redraw maps. The base had burned. The echoes, however, were still moving outward, and the next chapter was yet to be written. In less than 10 minutes, a fortress once thought invulnerable had been turned into a ruin of smoke and silence. Helicopters worth tens of millions, patrol aircraft that once guarded the Black Sea, and radar arrays that stitched together an entire defensive net, all erased in a single coordinated strike. The numbers are staggering. Hundreds of millions in damage, a 90-kilometer blind sector across Crimea, and supply lines stretched to breaking. But beyond the statistics lies a larger truth in modern war. Precision and timing can outweigh even the most expensive arsenals. And now, the question falls to you. What do you think this strike really means for the months ahead? Is it just one dramatic night? Or the opening move in a deeper shift across the region? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to follow every chapter of this unfolding story, don't forget to subscribe.